Now it's time to preview an upcoming game with Ryan Metzler.
Hey everyone, it's Ryan Metzler here again, and today we're going to take a look at a Kickstarter preview for a game that's already up and running on Kickstarter and is over a quarter of the way funded last I checked. That game is Slaughterball. Now this is a miniatures game in a sports arena where players are using genetically enhanced creatures, athletes I guess I should say, in order to try and score points. And it's not the traditional way of scoring points only. Yes, you're trying to shoot goals, but you're also trying to pummel your opponents, and doing so excites the spectators and of course gives you points as well. So you can take the approach of trying to shoot and be accurate, or you can take the approach of trying to beat your opponents into submission. Either way, scoring points. So real quick, why don't we check out what's going to come in the game, and a quick reminder as always that these are prototype quality components, not final quality components, so what you get will represent the function but not necessarily the form of what you'll see here. Despite that, we'll see how the game plays with these components, and then at the end I'll come back here and I'll sum everything up for Slaughterball. So here you can see the playing field for Slaughterball. Now we're looking at one of the two available maps. This one is clearly the Octagon. It says it down here in the corner, and this is going to be the map that will play 2 to 4 players. We'll see we have setup areas for 1, 2, 3, 4 players. If there are 4 teams, of course, they'll set up in their respective areas. If there are only 2 teams, they'll set up across from one another. We also have a scoring area over here, a penalty box for players that have, of course, committed fouls, and a slaughter box over here for injured players. Down in the corner closest to me, we're going to have a round tracker, and the game will be 6 rounds long. If you're only playing with 3 players, there's going to be a different board. This one, of course, is the hexagon. And we'll see that there are areas for 3 players to set up, with all of the same different areas out here for keeping track of score, slaughter, and injuries, as well as the rounds of play, which are over along the left-hand side, or your right-hand side of the board. So here we have Slaughterball, and we're set up for a 4-player scrimmage game. Now, scrimmage games are basically scenarios where everybody's going to have the same team. I've set it up for 4 players because that's going to be the most exciting way to play. Everybody's going to be running around, trying to pick up the ball, throw it to score, and beating on each other in addition to score points. So hitting other players is also worth points if you hit them hard enough to knock them down, or even better, injure them. So with 4 players, you've got the most going on, so you'll want to see that. But each player is going to have the same team. On a team, there are 4 different types of players. You're going to have round-based razors, and everyone will have one of these on their scrimmage team. This guy's going to be your quarterback, basically. He's the best at running, he's the best at throwing, but he's going to be fragile. Don't want to get him hit. You're going to have 2 of these cleavers. They have a pentagonal base. You can kind of see it here, so they're easier to distinguish. And these guys are kind of jacks of all trades. They're a little bit tougher than your quarterback, but they're still decently accurate. You know, they're not too bad dexterity-wise, and they can evade okay, but they're not special in any real way. You're also going to have 2 of these slashers. They have these hexagonal bases, even different again. These ones are a little bit stronger than your cleavers, but they are not going to be, of course, as strong as your next unit. They have a little bit better toughness. They hit a little bit harder, but they're not as accurate. So you kind of see you progress from more accurate to least accurate, but, you know, more accurate, or least strong to most strong. And then finally, everybody's going to have a brute. These are butchers, sorry. These butchers here have square bases, and these are your strong guys. They're going to have, of course, the most durability. They're going to hit the hardest, and they're going to be the ones you're going to want to try and take down other players with. You're also going to have a sheet here that tells you all of this information, what the stats are. Everyone's going to have an accuracy. Again, we have the razor's accuracy at 7, but we have the butcher's at 2. You have a brawling, which is how hard you're going to hit. 2 for the razor, but all the way up to 7 for your butchers. And you'll see you have dexterity, which is going to be how well you pick up the ball and do dexterity type things. Evasion, which is how well you can get away from being hit. Speed, which will be how fast you move. And toughness, which is going to be how hard it is to injure you overall. Now, of course, in a sports game involving a ball, the basic way to win is score points, and that's what you're going to want to do in this game. There are 3 ways to score points. The first is going to be being the first person to pick up the ball and run it over the meat grinder in the center of the field. So, right now we don't have a ball. How does the ball get onto the field? Well, you're going to launch it from one of the 8 launchers on the board, or 6 on the other board, and these are interspersed around the board, basically towards the center, and sometimes in between the teams. So at the beginning of the game, you'll roll a D8, and you'll choose where it's going to scatter from. We're going to start with launcher 3 over here by yellow. After that, you're going to determine how many spaces, again with the D8 roll, and this time it's 2. So Whoever is the last place player, either losing in terms of points, which nobody is right now, or last in turn order, or having the lowest team value in an exhibition or a league game, is going to choose where it scatters. Let's assume that red is in last place right now because they have the last place turn order, going yellow, then green, then blue, then red. So they get to scatter this ball 2 spaces in any direction. Maybe they go 1, 2 to put it over closer to themselves. However, unfortunately for them, yellow's still going to have first crack at it. Now, what you're going to want to do if you're yellow is pick up the ball and run it over any one of these 4 center spaces. That's called unlocking the goals and is worth 2 points to you as long as you pick it up, run it over, and manage to get the ball there. Now, you're not going to want to end standing here, but you're going to want to try and get through. So, on a player's turn, they get 3 actions. They have 3 onslaught markers, and this basically means they get to activate 3 of their players. Each one of those players will take 2 actions. So, they're going to choose a player to activate, and they're going to put one of these tokens with that player to show that they've activated that player on their team. With your players, you can do many different things, but the first thing you can do is, of course, move. Now, movement is going to be based on the move or speed value of your characters, with 7, 6, 5, or 4 movement with your fastest to slowest guys. So maybe our player decides to activate their razor, and they're going to go and pick up the ball. So they decide to move up to 7, moving 1 to pick up the ball. When they want to pick up the ball, they're going to make a dexterity check, and that's going to be a roll of their dexterity dice. They'll see here that they have 6 dice that they may roll, so they're going to roll 6 dice. If another player were adjacent, they can do what's called interfering. When you interfere, you can choose to interfere with any player you're next to on any die roll that they make, and that player will get to roll 1 die less for each interfering player. So if this player were here interfering, instead of rolling our 7 dice, or our 6 dice I should say, we would roll 5 dice. What we're looking for here is at least 1 knife on these dice. So we roll and we see that we get 1 knife, which allows us to pick up the ball, and we'll place it on our base. So we now have a ball that we are carrying. You'll note that we only rolled 1 knife, which is not great because each of these dice has knives on it. We have 1 knife, 2 knife, a star, which can be used by some abilities, a skull, which is pretty much useless, and we have a boot on each of these dice. So you're looking for 1 success in this case to pick up the ball. Now that we've successfully got the ball, we can continue our movement. We've only moved 1, so maybe we move a little bit further, dodging away. Now, each player will have some cards, and some in exhibition games will have abilities that will allow them to take a swing at a player that moves out of their own range of attack. So, each player is going to have some cards. And we may have an interrupt card. It looks like this, and it's going to allow us to essentially take a swing at somebody who's got the ball, or who doesn't have the ball, but is moving away from one of our characters. If red were to play one of these cards, and they were in this position, they'd be able to make what is called a carve attempt, which means that they're trying to hit somebody who's moving away from them, and it's basically an interrupt of another action that is allowed to happen by play of a card from your hand. These cards having many different actions on them, that one being interrupt, but some being a loss of momentum, which can end a player's turn early. If they do this, they're going to want to make sure of a couple things. One, they want to make sure they're not attacking a razor who doesn't have the ball, because it's kind of like hitting the quarterback who doesn't have a ball in football. You can get penalized for that type of thing if a player has a penalty card, which they would have in their hand, and it says penalty on it, and there are several different things that you can get penalized for, having your player kicked out of the game into the penalty box and having to bring them back later. So, he does have the ball. It's okay to hit him, even though he is a razor, and you can make an attack attempt here, using, of course, your brawling dice. The razor that's attacking only has 2, and it's going to be against the evasion of the other player, who has 6 dice. You may not want to do it with one of your razors, but you could try. So that would be 2 dice. Maybe you interfere with this player, so he only gets 1 die, against the 6 dice of our evading player. So 1 die is 1 knife. He got a knife, and the other player is going to roll his 6 dice evasion to kind of try and get away. So he rolls his dice, and he got way more knives than the player who rolled against him. He got away. Even if he had matched with only 1 knife, he still would have gotten away. But if he had less, he'd have gotten knocked over. And he essentially would drop the ball, which would then scatter in a random direction chosen by the player who's in last place. Anyhow, our player got away, and he's now moved 2 spaces, and he's going to run over the center here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and he's going to run over this direction trying to get close to somewhere he can score, and that's his first action. When he steps over this area, he's going to score 2 points, and he's going to mark that over here on the board. 2 points for him for opening up the different goals, and all of these tokens will come off of the board, and now you're able to make points by shooting on the goal. A second type of action you may make is to try and shoot, of course, and so you get 2 actions per activated player. He can now try and shoot from this area. the distance is going to be how hard it is to make the shot. So we'll see that he is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 distance from this goal. And he's not closer to any of the other goals. When you make a shot, you're going to go ahead and you're going to look at your accuracy. And you're going to roll that many dice. In this case, he has 7 dice that he rolls for accuracy. And he's looking for 7 knives, which is the distance between here and the goal. So he has 7 accuracy, he rolls 7 dice, but there's somebody who can interfere, which is this green razor. Of course, he's going to do so because he doesn't want yellow to score even more points. So the player's only going to get 6 dice to roll. He's going to pick up his 6 dice and he's going to roll them looking for 7 knives. In this case, he got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 knives, which is actually a successful shot from this distance on goal. When you shoot, the number of points you score, if you make it, is going to be equal to the distance. So that's a 7-point shot from our yellow razor, who now goes up to 9 points. After that, he's taken his 2 actions, and that player is done acting. But the ball, of course, is in the goal, and we need to scatter it from there. In this game, there's no resetting up after one of the players scores, so nobody goes back to their starting positions. What's going to happen is we have a launch template. This is going to get placed over the goal it's been scored from, and you're going to roll a die to determine where the ball is going to come out, somewhere on the opposite end of the field. So we rolled a knife. When we look at our template, we'll find that knife is straight across, and it's going to come from this launcher. We're then going to scatter it a number of spaces randomly, so 6, up to 6 spaces, again chosen by red because they're currently in last place. So the ball will come from this launcher right here, and maybe red scatters it over so that it's in their own play area, protected by many of their own guys. So now that yellow has finished movement with their first player, they're going to go ahead and move another one of the players on their team. Again, they can't move this one again because he's already activated, but they're going to use someone else. For example, maybe they decide to activate their slasher that's right here, moving him 5 spaces, or 4 in this case. He doesn't want to move the last one, and they'd like to attack the cleaver on the other team. They're going to do this by using their brawl dice, which are 4, and there's no one to interfere with them, so they won't lose any dice. It's important to note that if another player not involved in the brawl were adjacent to yellow, they could interfere with yellow, removing a die. Or, likewise, if they're adjacent to red and yellow, they could choose either of the players to interfere with, making it easier for the other player. And in this way, you can have alliances formed temporarily between players, trying to keep one player from scoring too many points, because yellow's already scored 9 in this first turn. So, maybe yellow is trying to attack red, and he gets 4 dice because of brawl. However, red gets to brawl back, and he gets 3 dice. So, it's going to be yellow's 4 against red's 3. We'll see here that we're going to roll these dice looking for knives again. So, our yellow player rolls 5 knives, while our red player only rolls 1. Yellow is clearly beaten red, and red is going to get knocked down in this case. This is going to be worth a point for the yellow player, because anyone you knock down is worth at least 1 point. Except for razors, because it's bad to hit razors, and even if they have the ball, they're worth no points. There's no glory in knocking down the quarterback, at least not in Slaughterball. But in addition to this, we have to check what the toughness value is of our cleaver, which is only 3. So the difference between our 2 values is 5 to 1. That's a difference of 4. Well, our toughness is only 3, which means that our player here is injured, and he's going to get moved out of the game into the slaughter box. He's also going to get some injury tokens to go with that. It's only 1 injury token because it's only 1 over the difference between the knives and the toughness, but it goes underneath him, and he'll need to be healed to come back into the game. In addition, instead of scoring the 1 point that they would have scored, this player has injured a cleaver, which is worth 2 points if we check our track, which is 2 more points for yellow, who goes up to 11 points in the first round. Now, there are a couple more actions that are available. We've already activated 2 of our players, so let's say somehow that this player over here has managed to grab the ball. I know it was over by red, but for the sake of example, our cleaver over here has managed to get his hands on the ball again here in turn 1. We're going to activate him, and he's going to do what's called a spike. He's going to try and throw the ball at another player in order to injure them. So he's going to move maybe a little bit closer to this player over here, and he wants to throw the ball at that butcher. So he's picked it up. His first action is to move. His second action is to spike. Spiking will be throwing that ball. He's going to try and whip it at the player's head. When he does this, he's going to need to roll pretty well, but it could theoretically be worth some points. So he's going to try and throw it at the green player here. When he does this, you can take a look at your reference sheet and you can see that he's going to be trying to make a spike action. He's going to throw his accuracy test plus his brawling test, adding those numbers of dice together. In addition, the person who he's throwing it at is going to roll an evasion test, and you get a bonus to your thrower's accuracy dependent on how big the guy you're throwing at is. So, in this case, it's going to be plus 6 dice. Our accuracy and our brawling together are going to be 4 plus 3 is 7, plus 6 more dice is 13 dice to try and knock this guy down. When we throw that, he's, as I said, going to roll his evasion, and an evasion for a butcher is only 2. So if we're rolling against 2 dice here, it's going to be awfully hard for him to not get hit. So it's going to be 13 dice against 2. We'd roll them, and whoever had the most knives is going to succeed. Most likely our player throwing the ball. When we do this, it's going to hit the other player, and it's going to knock them down as long as you make the appropriate roll. So you're trying to roll, and the number of knives you're going to need is more than the knives of the opposing player, plus the distance between the two. If you do this, you're going to knock the target down. And otherwise, they're going to stay standing. However, if you do knock them down, you're going to score some points. And you go ahead and you can take a look what scoring points is worth again, but essentially you're going to get points for each space between the player and you and 1 extra point, scoring that on your score track. The final type of action you can take is passing the ball to another player. When you do this, you're going to be throwing the ball, and you're going to make an accuracy check, while the other person that you're throwing to, maybe this person is throwing over to here, is going to make one of their own dexterity checks to try and catch the ball, and you're going to add the values together. So if I had an accuracy of 4 and the player I'm throwing to has a dexterity of 3, I would roll 7 dice, and what I will need is a number of knives equal to the distance, greater than or equal to the distance between the two, 1, 2, 3, 4, on 7 dice. So that's how you're going to throw it. Even if one player throws very poorly and the other player catches very well, you'll still catch the ball. So this person could completely and utterly fail, while this guy makes an awesome dexterity check and you catch the ball anyhow. So now we've seen that there are 3 ways to score points. You can score a goal or throw the ball at somebody's head, basically throwing the ball to score points. You can run up to them and hit them, hopefully knocking them down or even out into the slaughter box, which will be worth even more points. Or you can start the game by running over the center area, which is worth 2 points and opens up all of the goals. In addition to everything I've already shown you, you're of course going to have a hand of cards, and you start the game with 3 cards. At the beginning of your turn, you may discard down without whatever cards you don't like and draw back up to your hand size, but these cards are going to offer you different ways to change what's going on in the game. We have the interrupt card I already showed you, which will allow you to make an attack on somebody who's moving out of one of your threatening zones. We have cards like Brute that will give you bonus dice when making a brawling test against somebody, so anytime you're rolling brawling dice, you can use this card in order to maybe hit a little bit harder. You have things like Dodger, which will give you increases to an evasion test, hopefully so you can get away, the exact opposite of what we just talked about. Or we have a card called Brutal Spike, which when you throw a ball at another player, if you knock them out, could theoretically knock them out and kill them. So essentially they go out of the game, they get sent to the slaughter box, and essentially they will not be back, hopefully, unless they get a card that'll bring them back into the game. Now there are cards that bring players back into the game. There are things like Penalty Expires, which will bring a guy out of the penalty box. Or there are things that will automatically heal a player, allowing them to come back into the game. Players get penalized by a card that gets played whenever they break one of the rules of the game. So you can break rules and get away with it, but if someone has a penalty card, they can play that card. This can be played, for example, when someone attacks a razor that doesn't have the ball, or when a player attacks someone who's prone. If they're lying on the ground, you get more dice to try and hit them when you make a brawl test, but it's against the rules. You're trying to injure them in order to get points, of course, but if somebody catches you by playing one of these penalty cards out of turn, they can send you out of the game into the penalty box, and who knows when you'll return. So as I said, there are all types of different cards that will give you different benefits to dice rolls, that will remove players from the game, or bring other players back from the game. Now, when you're playing a game of Slaughterball, you're going to play over 6 rounds. That means each player is going to get 6 turns in order to try and score as many points as possible by throwing the ball into the goal or hurting other players. And at the end of those 6 rounds, whoever has the most points will, of course, be the winner. But, as I said at the beginning, there are 3 different ways to play this game. I've shown you what is basically a scrimmage. Everyone has the same stats. But what you can do is play with team-specific abilities. There are different types of cards. For example, this one is the Valkyries, where each one of the players is going to have different stats. For example, we still have Razors, Cleavers, Slashers, and Butchers, but they have different statistics in here for their accuracy, their brawling, their dexterity, their evasion, their speed, and their toughness. In addition, there are going to be abilities that you can use in the game that give you specific benefits for each one of your different types of players. For example, the Valkyries here are a little bit good at directing their own teammates and misdirecting other teammates. So there are abilities here where when they roll specific dice, like the Boots, they can use those dice in order to move their teammates a certain number of spaces, or to move their opponents a certain number of spaces out of the way. They also have abilities where they can discard cards from their hand as a special action to move their own players or other players even further. More so, they have abilities like Awesome Brute on their Butcher, where this is an ability where when you use one of those Brute cards I showed you in the deck, you get even more dice to make yourself better. We also have teams like the Nemesis. Now, the Nemesis get more cards than other teams. They're going to get extra cards, usually something like 6 for having their players on the field. And when they do this, they're going to be, of course, have the ability to better strategize through use of these cards. They also have ways to discard cards to cancel the card effects of other players' cards. We have the Sword of Damocles, and these guys are basically going to be the ultra good scorers. They're the best at scoring. They have abilities that are going to allow them to interrupt other players' movement with their interrupt cards, or they're going to have Star Evasion, which says anytime they roll a star, they may count it as a knife on one of their dice. They also have things like Awesome Brute that I showed you earlier, and Star Brawler, which is going to let them use stars for brawling, so anytime they roll a star while making a brawl test, they can count it as a knife. Finally, the last team that's included is Carnage, and Carnage is going to be not so much based on scoring. You'll see, at least not scoring through throwing, because their accuracy values are very low, 5 being the highest even for their razors. However, they do get a lot of brawling dice, and they have a lot of abilities that make them hit harder to remove guys from the game, such as Dirty Stomper, which is whenever you attack a prone player, instead of getting 4 bonus dice to hit, you're going to get 8, so you're even more likely to remove the game, but you're likely to lose a lot of your players to penalties when you do so. They're also going to have the Star Brawlers, so they get to use stars as knives when brawling tests, and they have things like Awesome Brute, which I talked about earlier, will get you the ability to use these Brute cards with even more extra dice. So each player can build their own team using the team values here to use different types of players in their games, and have the special abilities of those players out on the field. When you do this, one player may have a team that's worth more than other players based on their cost and team values. And when that comes into play, at the beginning of the game, there's going to be tokens to even that out. Players who are $500,000 to $1,000 less than another player or more will get these tokens. For each $500,000 you're under, you're going to get a underdog token. Some of them will let you use a player or use a token to exit the penalty box, while others will allow you to stand up your players. I didn't cover that, but standing up from when you're knocked down is a full movement action, and you don't get to move anymore after that when you do so, so this can let you stand up for free. Others may let you take cards out of the discard pile, and there are many of these different tokens that will allow you to get an advantage when you start out at a little bit of a disadvantage at the beginning of the game. Finally, in addition to the scrimmage play and the exhibition play with everybody having individual teams, there's going to be league play. And in league play, there's going to be special models that you can draft called Mavericks. You're going to have the ability at the end of the game to spend money in order to level up your characters, giving them new abilities, making them better, and specializing them for play. So if you want to play over time with like a group of 10 people who like to play games every week, try and level up their teams and have the best record over that period of time, that's going to be a way to play that you're going to enjoy. So no matter what, there's 3 different ways to score, 3 different ways to play, all types of variability in the cards and the tokens that you can use, as well as in the abilities that your players will have, and whoever best manages their team, best manages to score points in the 3 different ways, will be the winner. Well, there you have it. That is Slaughterball from Frog the What Games for 2 to 4 players, and that kind of makes it stand apart from the other sports games that are out there, like Dreadball or Blood Bowl. You can play 2, 3, or 4 players and have everybody going at it at the same time, and that adds a lot of chaos to the game, but not in a bad way. It makes it so that you have to be constantly aware of where everybody else is. You have to be constantly aware of where the ball can come back out onto the playing area, and just kind of all types of things you need to keep track of because of those extra players. Now, in addition, it has multiple ways to score. Things like Dreadball or Blood Bowl. Basically, you're trying to get the ball to the end zone or throw the ball into the scoring area with Dreadball. But this one has a couple of different ways to score. 1, you can pick that ball up and run it over the center. 2, you can go ahead and throw it. And the farther away you throw it, the more points you get. So the harder the challenge you take, the better. And I like that about this game. Or 3, you can just pummel your opponents into the ground. And I'm a big fan of that too. Just beating away at people. And in one game, I managed to score 22 of my 27 points just by hitting other players. So, a lot of variety in that. There's a lot of variety in the cards and in the setups, and even in kind of the balance of your team when you decide to do league play. So if that sounds good to you, they're looking for pledges on Kickstarter. Check it out. That is Slaughterball from Frog the What.
Thanks for watching our review today. For For more information about board games, as well as the #1 board game audio podcast, check out Dicetower.com for reviews, interviews, and more. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.